So, as promised, February we're going to be switching over to gardening. And I've grown a garden every year of my life. My dad grew up on a farm, so it was important that we always had fresh vegetables and fruits and flowers, and so it's just always been a part of my life. So I'm going to go through and show you how I determine how I do all of my background planning before I start planting anything. So one thing that's very important is every year I keep a little gardening journal. So in this, every time I go outside and do anything in my garden, every time I sow any seeds, anything like that, I keep tabs. So you'll see I also keep tabs on the soil temperature so that I know if things are warming up properly. But I keep tabs on everything that I observe, and then I use all these notes to update my plans for the next year. So what varieties worked best, what varieties didn't, which ones did better planted here versus planted there, when I fertilized, what worked better, what didn't work better, when pests arrived and how bad they were. So I'll go through some of the things that I've learned in some of our future videos as we come across them. But having a little journal is super helpful. I like paper form. I'm not an electronic journaler, so I like to have it in paper so I can have it right there with me, and I don't have to worry about remembering to put it in when I come back in. I don't take a phone or anything like that with me when I go out and garden. I like the peace and quiet without it. So get you a journal and start writing down everything, and you'll be surprised. I even like to write in there when things start budding, even if it's things like forsythias and crepe myrtles and things like that. I also like to keep track of my fruit trees, so when my peaches are starting to bud, my apples, my pears, what the blackberries are doing. I just try and keep track of all of that because it all adds up to a bigger picture. So the next thing I like to use is this garden planner. It's called Clyde's Garden Planner, and you can get this online in a lot of different stores. A lot of different seed stores, gardening stores, that kind of thing will have this. And it's a very handy little thing. So the way that it works is you line up this red line with your average last spring frost on this side. The other side is actually fall. So you can flip it over and get ready for fall too, come midsummer. But what you do is you line it up with your average last spring frost, and I know for where I am that that's between March 29th and April 5th, which puts me zone 7B, kind of borderline 8A. For the last few years, we were, I guess, upgraded to 7B last year when the new changes from the USDA came out. But that's something that I'd been seeing in my journaling for quite some time. So I already had made some switches that direction. But anyways, so you line it up with your average last frost, and then all these different, they all have a key down here at the bottom. So your first planting outdoors of onion sets would be February 15th, which is, just 2 weeks away now. So sowing indoors, but what's neat is this also shows, so the green check marks are when you'll start harvesting things. But if you go all the way over to the beginning, and a lot of people skip this section because they get focused on this part. But if you come over here to the beginning has, oops, I just popped it out of its little sleeve. The beginning has how many seeds, how many ounces of seed versus number of plants you would need for a 10-foot row. So that kind of gives you an idea of, okay, I have a 10-foot row in my garden. This is how many I would need. This is how many could fit in that space. Not that that's how many you would need, because needs are dependent on the size of the population you're trying to feed. But then the second one is super helpful, the planting depth. And that's something that people don't pay attention to as much as they really should. If you plant your seeds too deep, they don't have enough energy in that seed to get that seedling up through the dirt to where it's getting sunlight, where it can replenish that energy. So it only has a certain amount of energy in that little seed. And if you can't get that seed, if that seedling can't get to light fast enough, then it will die. You just won't, you will have wasted your time. So the planting depth is super important. The next one is the distance between rows or hills. That one I think you can play around with and see what works best for you and what works best for the varieties that you have. I know a lot of people are switching between different types of rows and widths, and when you do no-till, it changes it up. So that's not as finite to worry about. Next is distance between plants after you thin them. That's a helpful guide, but again, you don't have to be super particular in that. You don't have to get out the ruler and make sure everything is, exactly 1 foot apart. A lot of times a good guide is to use your foot. So if you need a foot, a 12-inch space between your plants, use your shoe, and you can actually walk between your plants. If you need 6 inches, half that size. But that's a good, quick, easy way with a tool you always have. The next one is the minimum sunshine required. So in order for a plant to grow and succeed, it has to have 3 main things. It has to have good soil, it has to have the right temperature, and it has to have the right sun and the right moisture. So 4 things really. But if you don't have the right sun, you're going to be fighting a losing battle. Your plant may still grow, but it's probably not going to be as vigorous. It's probably going to be more prone to pests and diseases because it's already in a weakened state. So it can't defend itself properly. So definitely make sure you have the sunshine that you need. There are sunshine detectors and meters out there. I'll show you that when I get to that point. I'll show you how I set mine out and how it works. The next is the minimum outdoor soil temperature for germination. So that goes back to where I had in my little journal where I've been keeping track of the soil temperature. And I just have a little temperature probe that I stick in the ground and I let it sit for 5 or 10 minutes and then come back and see what temperature it's registering. Because it doesn't matter what your air temperature is if your ground temperature is still super cold. So just because your air temperature has warmed up to, say, 60 degrees doesn't mean your soil has warmed up to 50 degrees in order to get that corn to germinate. And seeds have very your germination rate will be better and higher. So the amount of seeds that actually sprout will be higher if you stay within a germination temperature zone. So like say here for peppers, it says minimum soil temperature is 60 degrees. So I know in order to get a good stand of peppers, I need to make sure that I plant them when the soil temperature is at least 60 degrees. So anywhere between 60 and 75. Now the interesting thing about seeds and seedlings is that you typically need 10 to 15 degrees warmer temperatures in order for the seed to sprout. And once the seed sprouts, it can handle 10 to 15 degrees cooler than what it needed to germinate. So what that means is that if you put, say you put sweet corn out at 50 degrees and it sprouts and you have 1-inch tall seedlings and all of a sudden you have a cold snap come through and you get down close to frost and close to a really, really light frost, you should be perfectly fine, because that corn should be able to handle down to 35 degrees, because those seedlings are hardier than the seed itself. Now that goes out the window if these are transplants. If these are transplants, it's a different story. If they're direct sown in your garden, they will be much hardier. Now some things, you don't really want to do that. Peppers would take forever here if I tried to sow them in the ground, but I may try that this year just to see in comparison how they do, because I really don't like babysitting seedlings in my house. I don't like having to deal with the lights. I don't like the mess. I don't like having to water them inside and then venting them and making sure they don't grow mold, and I just don't enjoy it. So I'm gonna try some of these outside, like maybe some tomatoes and peppers, and direct sow them and see what happens once we hit that 60-degree threshold for them. But anyways, if you go over to this other side, it's going to show you approximately how much produce you're going to yield in pounds per that 10-foot row. So you'll see peppers, if you do that 10-foot row of, how many was that? 10-foot row of 6 plants. Then you will have, hold on. 10-foot row of 6 plants will get you 5 pounds of peppers. So that's pretty good return. I actually think you'll be higher than that if you have good, healthy pepper plants. So then this next category will show you natural companion plants. So plants that bring in beneficial insects or beneficial nutrients and things to each other, and they don't conflict with each other. They don't bring in pests that are bad for each other. So in this case, for peppers, they're recommending bush beans, carrots, onions, and okra. So that I don't do a whole lot in the realm of companion planting, just because I don't spend enough time to really learn it. The ones I do make sure that I do all the time is I always plant marigolds and basil with my tomato plants. So that is one that I do make sure I always do. But I may experiment with some of these others going along. But like I said, the other side, same thing except for fall. So this is super helpful, super handy. The next thing I use is I will go to the Farmer's Almanac. And in the Farmer's Almanac, you'll have, this has planting by the moon, but it also has the actual planting dates. And over here, you'll see areas. Now, I know I am in zone 7B/8A, but for the Almanac, I'm in area 2. I'm in Virginia. So if you go over here on this side, it'll show a lot of, pretty common plants that you would plant. And then beside it, there's these little E's and L's. That means early plants or late plants. And then coming over to whatever area you're in. So area 2, I know I would be planting barley between St. Patrick's Day and the first week of April. If I wanted to plant by the moon, it would be a little bit later. And so you can go through and see what are the recommended dates. And then I like to, because I've been keeping a journal, I like to compare those to what I'm seeing in my garden. And then, so if I was making my plan for this year and I didn't already have a plan, I would go in and put in all of these dates, and use them as my guideline. And so say maybe I would, for cucumbers, maybe I would plant them on 4/7. And then maybe I would plant them on 4/14 and then 4/21 and 5/1. You get the point. I would plant a set every week and see which ones did the best at the end of the summer. So which ones came up the best, which ones produced the best, lasted the best, were least infected by pests, that sort of thing. And so then the next year I would have that data to go back and say, okay, well, April 7th was really too early. Really needed to be more towards the end of April because it was just too cold, too damp, whatever you observed. Or maybe it needs to be April 7th because the ones that were started at 5:15 were too late into the spring, and then they were harassed by pests and were just totally eaten or shriveled up because it got too hot or whatever. So just the biggest thing is definitely keeping track, keeping notes. This is another interesting part. So if you follow any of the phenology, so this is kind of what people would call the wives' tales and things, where you, like said, plant potatoes when the first dandelion blooms, that sort of thing. These are interesting. So that's again going back to where I said if you keep a journal, you can keep records and you can say, okay, well, I know where I live, it almost always my my forsythias will bloom in mid-February. So if that's the case, then I know I can go to my chart and see, well, when does my chart recommend that I plant potatoes? Okay, so it says I should do it in anywhere from the end of January to mid-March. Well, I know that my forsythias bloom in mid-February. So I'm going to make note of that, and I'm going to shift those dates so that it indicates to me that I should plant my peas in mid-February. And I'll give those a try for a growing season, make some notes on them, see how they do, and if that works well, okay, well, that may be when I plant going forward. And that isn't set in stone, so I can go back and I can adjust whenever I want to. So I will shift forward and show you. This was my last year's chart, so super messy. I draw this up in Excel, and it's the main crops that I like to grow. This is fruits and vegetables, and then flowers and herbs on this one. And this has all sorts of writing and highlights and different things on it, and notes to say, try a different date and things like that. And then more notes on the back where I had to replant potatoes last year because it was just too cold and too wet early on. So this year I'm going to plant them a little bit later, especially since we've had so many snows this year. But this I keep in Excel, and at the end of the year I go through. In the wintertime, about now when there's not much going on in the garden, I will go through and update this, and I would make modifications as to what my data says I should do next year. And not every year is the same, so you're going to have late frost sometimes, you're going to have early summers sometimes, you're going to have droughts, you're going to have floods, all those sorts of things. But this is just a good guideline to have an idea of what's going on. So this is my one for this year. Nice and clean. I haven't done any writing on it yet. I'll go through and highlight the things, like, since I know this is the first week of February, I'll go through and I'll highlight the things in the first February column that I want to take care of this week, and I'll knock those out. So that's things like so these different symbols, letters, mean different things. So up here for beets, the X is sow in place, so sow in the garden. For broccoli, T is transplant or sow in place. And I think I'm going to try both of those because where I live, it's very hard to get cold crop plants early enough to get them out so that they can be harvested and out of the garden before the bugs really hit. So we're kind of behind the 8 ball here. I haven't gotten my seedlings started, so I'll have to be buying plants, but I will try and seed some broccoli probably into this week or next week. But then other ones, so these little stars, like here with celery, that is starting the seeds indoors. So I'll have a lot of that to do as the week progresses. The zeros are when you can start harvesting, and the Number signs are where you can harvest and plant. You'll see both at the same time. And this goes through, I only have half of it printed, so this only goes through August. But I have it set up in my computer where it actually goes all the way through to the end of the year. And when I get to summer, I will print those so that I have when I need to be seeding things for a fall winter crop. So that's how I do my planning. And then on top of that, I'll go through and organize my seeds, and I'll go through and show you how I do that tomorrow. But I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions or any suggestions of things I could do differently, I'd love to hear them. If you have any wives' tales of gardening advice, I'd love to hear those as well. And I'll try and put links to all these in the description so that you can go and do some planning for yourself if you'd like. And we think that's about it. So, hope you enjoy getting ready for your gardening season, and doesn't have to be a big, massive garden. It can be a tiny little pot on your balcony. I grew a great balcony one year. It had watermelons and even some corn. So don't count it out. You at least give it a try. Seeds are not very expensive. And it's just, when those seeds start coming up, it's so exciting. And then when you finally start seeing blooms and getting harvest, it's amazing. So, I hope you will give it a chance, give it a try. And if you're a seasoned farmer, or gardener, hopefully some of this was helpful for you. If not, well, I hope you have a great day. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening and watching. And I'll see you tomorrow.